Welcome to another episode of On the Issues with Ben-Meir. Today's guest is Michael Bedenbaugh, a political analyst and author whose latest book, Reviving Our Republic, 95 Theses for the Future of America, argues the need for political renewal in the United States and presents recommendations for such reforms in a historical context. Mike's diverse background includes 5 years of service in the U.S. Navy, as well as previously serving as President and Executive Director of Preservation South Carolina, working to protect and preserve the state's historic places. In this episode, Alon and Mike discuss the current immigration and customs enforcement actions in Minneapolis, Minnesota, including the deaths of 2 civilians, the Trump administration's strategy in conducting these operations, and the general atmosphere that has been created since Trump's return to power, and how the United States as a whole can put a stop to these actions and the general pervasive divide in the country.
Good morning, Mike. First, I want to thank you for taking the time this morning to talk about something extremely painful, excruciating development in Minnesota in particular. But before we do that, I remember well our first podcast we did about your book, Reviving Our Republic. That was an extremely wonderful experience for me. And to hear your ideas about how much needed these kind of reforms that you're calling for. And I think the development, specifically the last year, only attest to the fact that what you are suggesting in terms of reforms, it truly is overdue. And probably many of the things that we have been witnessing might have not occurred has some of these reforms been put in place a while ago. And I hope that we will have an opportunity to discuss that in the next session as we continue this dialogue between us. So today, let me begin by asking you the first question and about the horrific, painful development that has taken place in Minneapolis. First, of course, the killing of Renee Good, and now the second, which happened a couple of days ago, the killing of Alex Beatty. By all accounts, the dispatching ICE has been a disaster, not just in Minneapolis, but everywhere else. And it sort of became reminiscent of the horror that has taken place in many different countries, where the government authoritarian commit this kind of crackdown on civilians, no less. So let me ask you the first question. What is your reaction to what's happened in the last few days?
Well, Alon, thank you so much for having me back on. It's always a pleasure for us to sit down and talk. I tell you, my reaction to the killing of that amazing young man what I consider executed in the streets is similar to my reaction to seeing the second plane hit the Second World Trade Center, in the sense that the first time, it likened the analogy with Renee Good when she was killed, almost to all of us who believes in the rule of law, as bad as it looked, you still try to believe it's somewhat of an accident of undisciplined people, right?
Right.
But this one showed, just like the second one, oh, this is not an accidental plane hitting a tower. This is an intentional operation meant to install fear and to, not that these people are disciplined in some plane, because they're obviously not, but the machinery put in place for these people to act this way under the guise of law enforcement is meant to put in fear, and it's a horrific turn of events for how our federal government engages with its own citizens, that they have actually demonized as the enemy.
Right. And you put so well on your part. Now, I ask myself, what makes such an agent, an ICE agent, commit these type of crimes? What it is, what is going to take? And my feeling is that Vice President Vance said a few weeks ago that these ICE have absolute immunity. So these agents, when they're operating there, are working on the premise, I have complete impunity no matter what I do. And that is allowing them to take this type of lawless action that it should have ever happened, especially in this country. One one thing I want to mention to you. In a recent article, I equated IS to the Gestapo. And I received many, great deal of criticism. How dare I equate them to Gestapo? And I said, just think in those terms. What happened under Hitler at that particular time was, of course, hard to understand. It's unfathomable, the horror that has taken place. But when you look at it, what's happening here in the United States, under sort of democratic form of government, where people are free, should be able to know this is our country. For that kind of activity to take place here in the United States, to me, this was just as if it were the Gestapo operating in this country. That is, the equation here is because of the fact that it is happening here in this country, not under Nazi Germany. And that's why I feel there is such a strong equation between the two. Do you agree with this argument?
I do, and I want to clarify something that happens, and especially to Americans who really have a one-dimensional view of history, and it's a very cursory view. And people who are reacting negatively to that, including the head of ICE in Minneapolis when he discussed how horrible it was his agents were being compared to the Gestapo, is the fact that we and people who don't know history well just see the Gestapo through the lens of a finished war and images of 6 million skeletal Jews that had been incinerated in gas chambers. And so they equate Gestapo with after the actions of what they did, and they don't understand the Gestapo in 1936 or 1933 when it was conjured up. And what they were was nothing more than a shock force for a political party that had no limits on what they could do, and had also demonized their opposition to the point that they should do whatever they could do to stop them. And that is exactly what task has been given to ICE, is a political operation specifically against people they have demonized and can marginalize postscript after they have a bullet in them. And that's what people have to remember. This isn't the Gestapo of 1945 recollection, but it is a political army that has been armed and is terribly dangerous to our government.
And akin to the Gestapo. The point here is that there is a need for immigration reforms.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be Democratic one or Republican one, with national policy about immigration. And if Trump wanted to really settle this, I want to mention to you, I think in February 2024, there was a bipartisan bill in the Senate that provided a comprehensive reform to immigration. And you guess who opposed it at the time? It was Trump, who put a great deal of pressure on the senators, Republican senators, not to bring it to a vote to the floor.
That's right.
It have been absolutely passed. So Trump is not interested really necessarily with trying to, focusing merely on immigration, but sending this type of force is terrorizing the communities. This is not merely just trying to search and apprehend immigrants, illegal immigrants, but the way they have conducted themselves is inflicting such horror, such terror on the civilian community. And that is what, so he built up the polarizing the public. So a point is we versus them. And when you have that kind of mentality, when these eyes are operating under this kind of premise, well, they feel just free to do whatever they want to do because the other side is the enemy. Everybody else is the enemy. Yeah, yep. That's what I think it's been transpiring in terms of psychological dimension of what's actually happening.
Absolutely. And you can't understand any of this without understanding that Stephen Miller is the primary operationik in ensuring this policy gets through. He is the one that has set the tone for what needs to happen. a minimum number of people they need to bring in, no sense of understanding due process or justice, and also focusing in cities that are considered sanctuary cities and blue cities, so they can try to isolate that this is only happening there, when they really haven't done the same tactics in the red states in areas that would give more backlash to their base. The thing that most concerns me, it's fascinating just as a political scientist, is how casually the leadership, Kristi Noem and the like of those people, who can just sit there and make up things to say.
Exactly.
It's strange, and I think it rubs wrong. It rubs against the consciousness of Americans who truly believe that their leaders won't lie to them. I think there's such a large group of these people, and many of these are MAGA people, that they believe the people they have put their trust in would never lie to them. And that's going to be a reckoning. I don't know when it comes, but it's going to be interesting, just as a political scientist, to watch how this ends on her part.
This morning there was a Republican congressman, I forgot his name, and he said it's about time for the Republican to wake up to this horrific reality that we are going through at this particular juncture. And that is when this administration is going to wake up. When are they coming to their senses and say, no, we can no longer pursue this type of horrific policy, basically terrorizing civilian communities throughout the United States, and now in particular in Minnesota. And along the line of what you just said, for Kristi Noem, for other officials to come out immediately and deny and painted the poor Alex as a terrorist with a gun, ready to shoot, ready to kill. What a horrific insult to just imagine to his family. This is a person, he's a nurse, he's a dedicated individual. He came just to protect a woman that's been shoved around by ICE, and he has ended up paying with his life because he's trying to do a good deed. And to paint him as a terrorist, you could not have possibly inflict a greater insult, a greater pain, greater agony on his parents, on his families and his friends. This is this kind of mentality. How do we go about changing it? How do we go about awaken those many, still the majority of Republicans, that if this continues, this is going to lead to a catastrophe, in my view. I mean, on a national scale. That's how I see this evolving. What's your take on that?
Well, I have two responses to that. One, knowing American history, the type of justifications that these people are given to violence is not much different than the justifications people gave in my home state to lynching a black man in a community because, false narratives of him insulting a white woman, which was very common. Hundreds and hundreds of black men were lynched for less than that. And so this trend of holding on to power by being so myopic in your view to justify whatever actions you take is an American tradition that has been regionally marginalized, but now is spilling over into modern mainstream in a way that people are waking up that there's an element of America that this is showing that we've always had to some degree. And what was the second part of your question?
What I'm saying is how is it possible that for something like this to happen, and yet the vast majority of the Republicans pretty much remain numb, saying nothing about it? There's a call this morning, as I said, by one congressman who's saying it's about time to wake up, or else we are actually moving rapidly toward a catastrophic development that will engulf the entire nation.
Yes, you're right. So here's where it could move to catastrophic results, but also results that I think need to be engaged quickly. And I'm surprised Minnesota hasn't done it, but I'm not surprised the governor is still believing in the myth of trying to work through this. I don't think that's going to happen in Pennsylvania. And I could see the governor of Pennsylvania potentially calling the state guard to protect state citizens. And whenever a strong willed governor takes that step and says, our federal republic was always meant to protect the state citizens from the overreach of the federal government. And if we have a state to call out the state guard, and we have ICE agents and maybe even National Guard from other states in a state where they're having pointing guns at a state guard, that will cross the Rubicon into a way that will be catastrophic in the short term, but then set the tone for how do we maintain our federal republic with this. It truly could lead to that.
Yes. I want to, I'm looking at it also in the context of the general atmosphere that Trump has created since he came back to power. That is, this is not just an isolated development. There was a buildup, the violation of Constitution on a regular basis, the disobeying court orders, the horrific various executive orders that he has taken, name it, in just about every field, against the black, against Hispanic, against the immigrants, against name it. So what he has created is an atmosphere, a poisonous atmosphere that was naturally was going to lead to something of such magnitude. It's going to happen. It was only a question of time.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't happen just in a vacuum. It was building up to a point where, and then, like I said earlier, when a president, vice president tell you where they can operate with impunity, well, he now completed that horrific atmosphere. Now we have a chaos as though, okay, American public can be subjected to this kind of a treatment, but it is okay because our mission is much larger than what the American right is all about. American individuals are all about. So how do we change the context, that is the atmosphere, that is, in my view, unless that's changed, whatever can happen in Minnesota, what can happen in Pennsylvania, maybe different now what's going to happen in Pennsylvania, but nevertheless, the atmosphere, the poisonous atmosphere that Trump has created could now, it's going to be, it will continue to have repercussions on so many other things that we are been experiencing over the last year in particular.
Yeah, well, it is created intentionally. Okay, all of this has been created, and it's all part of Project 2025, because when you demonize the opposition to the degree that has happened over the past 30 years, to where just saying the concept of a Democrat is the same as saying a traitor to the Union or a traitor to America, has led to where you dehumanize these people and it doesn't matter. And
Exactly.
in your studies, you've seen that all over the world, how that happens. And now it's happening here. What will stop it, I'm afraid, will be more and more incidences of this type of violence until a true upheaval takes place. And unfortunately, America is littered with these type of events. And I'm afraid we're about to go through another one that is as serious as our Civil War. And I don't want to make that too hyperbolic because, the Civil War was so huge and catastrophic, but I think it will be reduced to a certain mobism that has to be dealt with. And until it gets so bad, the cart rights itself, it could be many more incidences before that happens, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and I think you're right. We are probably moving fairly rapidly toward the precipice of potentially of a civil war. I mean, this may very well be exactly what Trump is striving for. But I'm thinking that there's a shorter term objective that he has. Think of those terms and see if you agree with this notion. That is, he's sending these troops. They're behaving the way they're behaving. This is a midterm election year. Now, I see that as a build-up. Will continue to build up toward the midterm election, dispatching these people throughout many, many cities, potentially intimidating those who are in line to go to vote, and eventually confiscate the voting box, the mailing boxes, and declare that this particular that the midterm election is not valid. I'm prepared to go as far as suggesting that, and what is going to take now, if the potential to stop this potential scenario from taking place.
I think that's exactly the scenario that's going to take place. It goes, here's another parallel thing that is happening. The federal government is attempting to get the states to turn over all voter data of all individuals who have voted so the federal government can have that. And that destroys the federal protections that states have had because of the accessibility to private data. Thankfully, and I'm kind of surprised in our own state, South Carolina, that McMaster, who was one of the first supporters of Donald Trump, has actually been in front of not allowing our state voter data to go to the feds.
Right.
But that shows their intent. And in fact, Kristi Noem has even hinted to Governor Walz that, this can be a lot easier if you give the voting data and transfer that voting data over to us. In so many words, she kind of hinted at that. So that's what this is about. And I fully agree. The more chaos they can create, the potential for trying to float the idea of stopping elections is true. And just another point of that, if Governor Shapiro sends out the state guard to protect communities against federal agents and shooting takes place, it'll be game over on what other states will then arm themselves. I guarantee you that will happen with Newsom in California. And we're going into a place where we haven't been ever among the people living here. And it's about us to then try to figure out how to work our way through it to a stable society after that, which could be 5 or 10 years.
Yeah. So, I've been thinking in terms of, okay, how do we go about trying to send the message, unmistakable message to this administration, that this cannot happen. It cannot continue. And I've been advocating mass demonstration, mass protest nationwide. That should be consistent, relentless, day in and day out by the millions. I know this is perhaps a tall order to ask, but in my view, unless there is sustained protest throughout the United States and strikes if necessary, and it could also lead to civil disobedience, probably the message will not resonate with this administration. So the question is how this could be brought about, because I think maybe this type the peaceful protest may very well be, in my view, the only way, provided, of course, has to be consistent, has to be massive, has to be relentless, to send that kind of message that enough is enough, we're not going to take it anymore. What is the potential of that eventually happening, and how to perhaps bring about to instigate that kind of, let's call it, counter-revolutionary movement to stop this horrific action by this Trump administration is taking place?
I think there's something happening now that could be the germ of what the potential is. So if anybody looks up online something called Walk for Peace, so there is 18 to 20 Buddhist monks that have left Fort Worth, Texas, from their home there, and are walking from Fort Worth to Washington, D.C. 2,800 miles they are walking, called the March for Peace. And as they have walked, they have gathered thousands of people coming out to see them. They were within 10 miles of my home, my farm, and I took my microphone and I was able to sit down and get an interview with the leader of that. And Alon, it was incredible as I drove up, because I didn't really know what was going on. My wife had told me about it. And as I drove to where they were spending the night in a Methodist church, a local small community Methodist church gave them their community space for them to sleep for the night. And I went, and a mile before I got to the church, the road was lined with cars. This is the center of the most rural area in South Carolina and the buckle of the Bible Belt. And there was 300 people gathered around this little church just to meet these people. This nation has so many people that are so hungry for true loving kindness focus that these monks are bringing out the best in people. I actually got to interview them, and I have an interview with them for 12 minutes. And it was one of the most eventful interviews I've ever had in my life with this man. And so the next day I went to see them when they came through a little town of Saluda. Here's a town of 3,000 people. 1,000 people filled the courthouse square to visit. They listened to this Buddhist monk talk about being present, breathing, and waking up with a thought of peace. So as they go up, when they went into Columbia, 10,000 people filled the State House in Columbia. I could see their march to D.C., and I am hoping, and I'm actually talking to people about this, for this to be a potential peace march on D.C. in mid-February around these monks. Now, they are not advocating for that at all, and I'm not speaking for them, but I am speaking as a witness to how they are moving people as an alternative to the darkness that is coming, that is also rising. And that gives me optimism that there's enough people here that will make this happen. So that's what I pray for.
Well, I hope so. I hope so. When you look at what happened in Minnesota, the killing of Renee Good obviously immediately instigated that kind of demonstration, and throughout the city, thousands and thousands pour into the streets, protesting about the horrific murder of Renee Good, and then of course the killing of the second person, 37-year-old nurse. It instigated a national outrage for that matter. But to get to a point where you're going to have nationwide protest,
Mm-hmm.
is it going to take another major breakdown? In order to instigate that kind of reaction? What is going to take to get to that point? That is, this march is very important, and it's sending a clear message as they move toward come closer and closer to DC. But in my view, that's not going to be in and of itself enough to send that kind of message. That is, it may very well take another major breakdown that will eventually push a rising or instigate this massive uprising of the people. That's what's going to take. Do you think we are perhaps building towards something, another explosion of this kind?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what I see us on is a ladder, and we're taking steps upward or maybe downward. But the point is, we are every step builds the opposition to what is happening and the legitimacy for opposition to what is happening. And it's interesting to see all the different ways opposition is coalescing. I have also seen what concerns me is a more militaristic opposition and not a peaceful opposition. And so this is where we need strong leadership. This is one of the reasons I'm really working hard to push the reviving our republic concept, that there is a peaceful way we can do this, and that the reason we're in this situation is structural issue. The way the structure of our government has been altered over the past 50 years has led to this confusion on how it operates and the breakdown of how it operates. And so it's just going to take more incidences, and hopefully it will not be as much bloodshed as has already occurred, but I fear it will be. But hopefully it could be to the point of where we can stop this.
Well, I'm not sure. If I wish there'd be no further bloodshed, but it seems to me that blood is what has instigated this outrage, this senseless murder of somebody lying on his face on the ground to be shot 10 times.
Yeah.
And the person who shot him decides probably he felt, well, I can do so and get away with it. And even if I go to trial and we're going to get pardoned by the president. That is the kind of approach I've been taking. Now, the question, that I am, I've been thinking about in terms of what Trump has been doing is basically dismantling piece by piece the pillars of our democracy as we see it, as we know it. And the crackdown on the immigrant is a part and parcel of a much larger agenda that he has, and that's how that was happening. Now, if he wanted, to have some kind of arrangement where the immigration problem can be dealt with, he could have today, instead of just trying to chain the person in charge of what happened in Minneapolis, is called for the Senate to sit down and think about a comprehensive bill to deal with immigrants. But he's not doing that.
No.
He's not interested in that. So what is going to take? And then, of course, you have a Republican, the majority of Republicans, are basically none of them is calling for something like this because they still do not want to offend him. They don't want to go against what he wants and what he deciding to do. So how do we move the needle here because in my view, unless you have a cluster of Republicans, 10, 15, who say enough is enough, put their career on the line, and stand up, risk whatever they need to risk in terms of their profession, position, but say enough is enough. We will no longer support this kind of bankrupt, morally bankrupt, practically bankrupt agenda. What is going to take to awaken a handful number of Republicans to do just that?
Alon, I don't know. What amazes me is as I look at the feeds and look at the responses to my videos I do every day, I see very little shift away from the core 35 to 40% of folks out there who absolutely believe everything Donald Trump and the administration is putting out there with uncritical thinking. And none of that has changed. And so what I have seen happen is a coagulation of authoritarian tendencies, people who have these tendencies of subservience yet dominance at the same time, have all coagulated around this movement. And that's not going away. And the only way it's going to be mitigated and diminished is a unification of the other 65% of the nation to show it how wrong it is. And I don't know how that's going to happen without a lot of more catastrophic things. The thing that fascinates me, again, just with my political science hat on, is how the conservative movement in this nation has now shifted into a sycophantic team of people who believe everything the federal government is telling them, as it is personalized in one man's influence. It's fascinating to me how they can do that. And now for these same people who has been touting how gun rights are the bottom line of our nation are now condemning this man for that he happened to have a gun strapped onto him as the problem. This is a world upside down, and it's corrupted. The conservative movement that follows this process is now fully corrupted, and until more of the middle folks that consider themselves conservatives see that and own that and have an alternative, it's not going to stop.
Right. I put try to envision putting myself in the shoe of a congressman, of a Republican senator, and I'm asking myself, okay, I'm supporting this president blindly. I'm following him like a blind sheep. And I'm thinking to myself, look at yourself in the mirror and think, okay, what's going to happen a year or two down the line? I mean, this man is 79 years old. Nature will take its course. Do they think in terms of, okay, where this country is going to be? I mean, he's going to leave the political scene in one form or another. Where are we going to be? Where these Republicans who've been blindly supporting him are going to be, when he is no longer at the political scene, he is no longer leading this blind sheep party. What do you think? A Republican look at himself in the mirror saying, where do we go after that? Do they ask themselves this question? What's going to happen post-Trump when he is no longer there? Where are they going to be? Where the Republicans are going to be? How are they going to face the nation? What are they going to tell the American public that have been numb, did nothing when in fact this man is ravaging the country in every which way he could?
Well, I will counter that it is far beyond anything this one man is doing. Like I said, I believe this movement has congealed into a mass of power that is making up 30 to 35% of the country, and that's what they are following. This is far bigger than just one president now, and the president will be cast aside, and somebody else will be put in its place. What's fascinating is they haven't created their own party. Instead of, they're demonizing rhinos and Republicans in name only and taking over the Republican Party. In American history, I would have expected them to have created their own party, but it's here to stay. And what's fascinating is how people that are going against it, look at Marjorie Taylor Greene. I am no fan of how Marjorie Taylor Greene acted up until the past couple months, but now she has finally been pricked by the leadership and the MAGA base. But instead of staying in office and fighting for her beliefs, she's just quitting and leaving. And that's what concerns me most. People that are having problems with what's happening, they're not fighting for their beliefs. They're just, okay, I'm unelectable now. I'm not even going to try, and I'm going to leave. And that's a great disservice to public debate in this nation.
Yeah, but from her perspective, I heard her saying at the time a while ago that she decided to leave because she'll be much freer to speak and say what's on her mind when she is no longer a member of Congress. That's her position. Then we see some fissures within the Republican Party. It's no longer few. For example, is call on Indiana to change the map in order to create more seats for Republican, gerrymandering in there, and they refuse. So there is some kind of fissure is happening within the Republican Party. Like I said earlier this morning, one congressman is calling enough is enough. We've got to do something about what's happening. To what extent do you think, because going to your point you're making, this movement, this mega, it doesn't depend just on one person in the face of Trump, but it is much larger than that. Let's take this scenario a little further developing. How do you see that? As Trump is leaving, obviously there is Vance, who probably the likely person who is going to inherit his position. Do you think Vance is going to be in that he would pursue the same kind of policies, given what he's now witnessing happening in this country? What do you think is going to happen then?
I don't
we're
know.
speculating here.
Yeah, and I have no idea. It's so volatile and so many different moving characters that it's impossible to say. All I can focus on is the counter narrative that must be elevated, uplifted, because operatives and people that take advantage of the moment will try to rise up and ride this tide. And I suspect it'll be some people rising up with the delusion mindset that thinks, okay, I know this is wrong, but I'm going to get in charge of it so I could steer it another way. The opportunistic sales sycophantic political class, I see people maybe thinking they could do that. So who knows who's going to have that voice to be able to persuade people in the next couple of years. It'll probably come out of what happens in the midterms. Whatever happens in the midterms will then determine what will happen in 2028, because some leadership will rise up out of whatever chaos happens in that to try to take the reins of this. because I think now with his mental stability in question, I have a hard time thinking Donald Trump will have a legitimate ability to try to run a third term. I think he would, if he would have been younger, I think he would have definitely tried to do it.
Well, I mean, also he's not well. I mean, healthy in terms of health. I don't know. Sometimes I'm saying to friends that I'm not sure he can even finish his term, 3 more years in the office, given his health and
Yeah.
given his condition. Then people looking at him falling asleep in the middle of important
Yeah.
session or meeting with his secretaries and all of that. So, will he actually, in fact, last for the next 3 years? I don't wish him, anything bad, but I don't. I think is for him to run or thinking of running. So yesterday, somebody said that we're doing so great, we should think about running for the fourth time. He skipped the third time. That's only yesterday. So going back to your point that you made, this movement is obviously strong, and recent polls have been taken. Still, 90% support what Trump is doing.
Mhm.
90% of this group, which is scary in many ways. But the question is, I have for you, being looking at this political scene in such a keen way, what is the glue? What is the glue that's going to keep this movement together? What is the secret? What it is that they are seeking for? What is the end game? What is there an end game? And when that is those who oppose the MAGA movement, they ought to understand what is the end game of the MAGA movement in order to be better prepared to deal with it. I don't see a position taken by, say, a number of Democrats are saying, this is what we are facing, and we should be prepared to deal with it as it continues to evolve. So what is the end game on the one side, and what the other party need to be preparing in order to deal with that? Is there any kind of understanding? Is there any kind of gogging what's actually happening?
Yeah, I don't think the Democratic Party has a clue how to handle what's happening. And because I consider the organized corporatized Democratic Party for helping to create what's happening now in bumbling through and allowing this to happen. But what is the end game of these folks? All of my friends here that I've known all my life who constantly say things like, thank goodness our government finally has a spine. They are so misinformed of the bigger picture beyond one or two categories of interests, whether it be we've stopped abortion nationally, these moral church bound issues that people think about when they walk out of church in the South and think how immoral our nation has gotten. It's all these abstract notions that honestly they don't know, but this rhetoric feeds into those abstract notions that is perfect because it doesn't have to promise any outcome except here's how we make you feel now, and we're hearing your concerns, so let us do what we keep doing. I've had so many people tell me this is what we voted for, and I know they do not know the facts about what is really happening because the silos of information are so tight that they're not even accessing them.
This is very true, but they also know that they are a minority, relatively speaking, 30-35% of the electorate in the United States. And the only way they can actually maintain semblance of power if they continue to be in power. The question is how they're going to swing that if there is truly a fair and free election that's going to take place, be that midterm or a presidential election in 2028. That is, they can satisfy themselves with the immediate gains that they're
Mm-hmm.
making under President Trump. That is now without looking at the ultimately where do we want to be. So I want to get to that back to this point that is if they want to maintain or hold onto power, they're going to have to do something different, something extra, something more. And that will bring me back to the biggest obstacle that they will have is an election, is a free and fair election. So what they will have to temper with that in order to maintain some, their hold on power. And that is probably what I'm thinking in terms of what Trump is gearing up to.
Mm-hmm.
He's moving up to that particular point because he knows, based on polls being taken now, the Democrats will certainly win the House and potentially even the Senate if the situation continues to deteriorate to what we are witnessing today. So if they don't have a clear end game, they're going to have something else to hold on to, even if they are unable to express it or say it. So where do you think is their mindset in this particular? You saying yourself, when you talk to them, they are thinking, "Oh, this is what we wanted. He's delivering what we wanted, and we're settling for these immediate gains." But I'm sure that many of them thinking, "Okay, where do we go beyond that? Or what's going to
Well,
take?"
yeah, well, I think there's two things. One, the opposition has been so demonized that they truly believe they're protecting the nation from these bad people. Okay, so that,
Yeah.
that leads to the sense of righteousness in their cause. Then you also have a good third of the nation that just wants to be left alone. Keep your head down. Make sure I got my job. I want to keep my benefits of retirement, and just leave me alone. And enough of international affairs from revolutions around the world that it doesn't take a majority to overthrow a national government foundation. I
That's
mean,
right.
all it takes is a good, focused, organized minority, and they could change the world. And that's what we have with these people. We have an organized group that, even though it tends to want to fracture on the edges, even with all of this, it's still not doing it yet. And
Right.
yeah, so
Yeah, let's just focus for a few minutes toward the end of this wonderful conversation I have with you. Um, what is going to take? I'd like to sort of for our listeners to understand, okay, you guys are talking about these kind of things. What shall we do in order to put stop to it? What kind of action? I'd like to visit with you and what steps need to be taken in order to begin a process where the Republican wakes up, the White House, if they can wake up, to say, well, this is not our approach is no longer working because we have instigated A, B, C, and D. Let's talk about what is going to take. So we spoke initially, I mentioned before, I think nationwide the protest on a continuing basis, relentless, it has to go on um, from now and on until Trump changed his ways. Well, that's a tall order, but it is based on everything I learned from history. Protest of this magnitude, massive, could make a difference. What other step need to be taken? Let's just develop a 3, 4 different steps between you and I that is going to potentially help change the dynamics of what's taking place, other than the massive protest.
well, I look at it as this way. It's such a big, complicated thing. Every citizen needs to bring what they can bring to it and elevate it and try to connect with others who feel the same way. My part of this, my little pie slice of my contribution, is my book, Reviving Our Republic. And what I'm trying to do is show the power, what I believe it could be a foundation for reimagining the fact that our nation can work if these certain things can be repaired. And to organize that movement is what it's going to take. It's been difficult. I have yet to have a Republican tell me they disagree with most of the things, and I've yet to have a Democrat tell me they disagree. But they're still so locked into their party tribalism that they're not seeing it yet. So my job that I'm doing is doing everything I can to share what my book says and what I think will work. And I'm just trying to get people to hear that, and uh, maybe have an event on the mall with these monks showing up and trying to have a big rally then. But if anything happens with the voting, I'm convinced in the summer we're going to have streets filled like we've never had them filled before in the summer of 2026. Around July 4th, the birth of our nation 250 years ago, this is a day of reckoning whether how our next 250 years is going to look, and that will be the catalyst.
I think that's building up toward that. I think that would be obviously significant, if not historic,
Yeah.
development if this were to take place. What you're doing is obviously admirable in terms of the reform that you are suggesting, and it should happen, and hopefully we will be talking about it further, you and I, for some time to come. The only concern I have is this is sort of a long term. This is going to take a while before we can implement this type of reform. It's going to take a massive consensus, public consensus by the various various institutions. But it is necessary and ought to take place, and it should be pushed as hard as we possibly can. But for the immediate term, other than protest, what else can we do? We spoke about the Democrats. What the Democrats should be doing. So far, they have done pretty. They've been scattered. There was not a single message that's coming from the Democrat. What they are supposed to be doing.
Well, I think we're going to see that in Josh Shapiro. I think leadership, Democratic executive leadership in the states that are strong and willful, like Newsom in California and Shapiro in Pennsylvania. It's going to be interesting to see how far they're willing to go. The Attorney General of Pennsylvania has already stated that if ICE breaks state law, they will prosecute them and detain them. And that's going to show the spine of the Democratic movement, and it will coalesce around that, and that will be the leader of the party in 2028. Because
Yeah,
that's what it's going to take.
I think absolutely you're hitting it exactly. That is, when there is a breakdown, usually it could potentially lead to some kind of a breakthrough. That is, you need a crisis of such magnitude for a Democrat or a number of Democrats to rise to the occasion. Either Newsom, be that Newsom or Shapiro of Pennsylvania. So this is, yes, in my view, this is what's happening now has given the opportunity for some of these individuals to rise to the occasion and try to do something about it. So this is important development. So we're talking about protests. We're talking about uh, Democrats need to organize themselves better to come up with a message. And we need leadership, a new leadership among the Democratic Party, including Shapiro, including Newsom of California, and perhaps other Spitzer of Chicago. I mean, the governor of Illinois, for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
So we have these kind of emerging. I mean, I think without this crisis, probably we wouldn't have been seeing these people emerging as the new face of the Democratic Party. What beyond that? What's it going to take?
Well, I do want to make a note. What is so tragic to me is, we need a multi-party pluralistic system in the nation. And the fact that there's so many cowardly Republicans who don't see the opportunity to remake a more centrist conservative party out of this, which is what they should be doing, which is what I think my book would feed into, and handing over and giving power to a corporatized political party that I think has terrible flaws in it. And unless it's remade with a new brand, it won't survive either, and the pendulum will swing back again in another 4 years. So hopefully it'll be more of a shift than just empowering the other party again. We have to see that this bipolar system we have is not working anymore. And until that's remade, we're going to be swinging this pendulum for the next election after election until it finally collapses.
Yeah, because to have two extremists from both sides extremes, and so this is very difficult for them still to meet in the middle. The thing that I wanted to raise with you is that given this development, um, Trump may very well take some initial step to pacify the situation a little bit in Minneapolis. Um, but this, and I just want to take your views on this. We spoke initially about there's a fissure within the Republican Party. There's people becoming disenchanted and happy what's going on. privately, they are condemning Trump, as a matter of fact, but they are afraid to say anything publicly. Some, like Marjorie Greene, left the party. So, do you think as we come closer and closer toward the midterm election, these people now are very concerned about, are they going to be reelected when they go home? With that, do you think that this cracks that is taking place now within the Republican leaders, both in the House and the Senate, uh, to what extent, from your perspective, based on what you see, that may very well further increase over the next few months as they become closer and closer to the midterm election, because these people now started to feel on, well, if I do not change my position, I'm going to have to meet my constituency, and they are very, very unhappy about what's going on right now. To what extent do you think that is going to change the dynamics?
I don't think it's going to change it any yet, because I haven't seen the constituency pushing back on what's happening. Even with this, I have seen and heard so many of my friends through Facebook still justify the fact that what happened to the nurse, Alex, what happened to Alex in Minneapolis, he deserved it. I'm still hearing these people say it. Yeah. So I don't see it changing. I don't see that core changing at all. And the districts are so gerrymandered, politicized, that as long as they maintain that 50 couple percent of core belief, they're safe. There may be one or two on the edges, but I don't see that. I don't see that changing.
But then, in short of manipulating the election or actually seizing the voting boxes, that means they are really going toward a slaughter comes November. In terms of certainly they would lose the House. Certainly, I mean, potentially they could even, Democrats could capture the Senate. That is, they know that if they don't change, they are going to be losing the coming election unless they tamper with the election itself.
I think that it will potentially on the edges, but I tell you, there is so much hatred toward the Democratic Party in many regions of South Carolina and in the district I ran in, that if people can't bring themselves to vote for a loyal Trumpite, a sycophantic representative that they don't like, that's a Republican, they won't vote at all because they cannot bring themselves to vote for the Democrat. Mm-hmm. Just the branding is so poisoned down here that you'll just see a drop in voter participation on the conservative side. And that's what happened with Trump. I mean, I saw that happen. I had so many people tell me they just couldn't bring themselves to vote for Biden, so they didn't even vote for president.
But of course, the Democrats, have to appeal to the segment of the very people, say right of center for Republican, and of course the independent, the Hispanics, the Black, that been many of them who in groups have voted for Trump because they were very unhappy when the Biden was in power. So I think there's a big enough pool for the Democrats actually to harness, the kind of voting, the numbers they needed in order to win this election. So even if these Republicans do not go to vote, that does not enhance or improve the candidacy of their Republican representative. Because there is a natural, there is Democrats have a constituency the candidate is going to continue to vote. Many are encouraged to do so. And those who abandon the Democratic Party went with Trump certainly are going back now and will be supporting the Democratic candidates. The final words, I leave it to you.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about all of this, because it's going to take a lot of these type of conversations for us to try to process what really needs to happen. The only thing I would leave with, based on what we've been talking about, is how astonishing to me there has not been an organized third-party movement that could act as a wedge. I mean, what's happening now to me is more akin of what happened under Jackson with the Whig Party forming against Andrew Jackson. And I'm really astonished that it is not organized or something like that. So that's going to be interesting to see if that can come out of all of this. But all in all, I have hope in the American system. I have hope in the ability of it to heal itself, but I don't have rose-colored glasses not to think that it will be a traumatic transition to get to that. And I just hope and pray it won't be as bad as it potentially could be. But we must buttress ourselves and be ready for what comes.
I definitely share with you the notion, our institutions, I hope Democratic will survive. We just have this horrific crisis that's taking place. That's the third party. We can talk about it some other time. Thank you so much, Mike, for taking the time. And I'm looking forward to seeing you this weekend. And we'll continue this conversation and we'll take it from there. Thank you again.
Thank you, Elon, very much. Take care.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode on the issues. You can find this podcast on my SoundCloud page, and stay tuned to my social media accounts for the latest analysis and announcements.